Hey and welcome to another issue of Movie Soundscapes. My name's James Welch, and today I just want to do a video that is about how do you get into soundtracks, or how do you get into film music, or you could, in another way you could say how did I get into film music. That's what I'm going to talk about now, but I'll be interested to hear all your stories about how you got into film music, or perhaps you just stumbled across this channel and you fancy getting into film music, but you're not really sure how to. My journey into film music began at a very young age, and when I was growing up, I had an active imagination already, sparked by stories, books, but predominantly once I started watching films or TV or television series when I was growing up. Now I grew up in the late 70s and early 80s. Well, 70s and 80s I grew up really. And my dad used to have a massive record collection, or pretty big record collection. And once I started watching a few films that I caught on literally on TV, because we're talking back when videos were first coming out. So the first memory I have of a soundtrack as such, and it's not really a soundtrack, it's not to a film, but what I used to do with my sisters, we used to make our own little films inspired by films I'd seen. So it could be, for example, we saw Jaws for the first time, we'd then do a version of Jaws, and so forth. And so, you know, way back before computers were around, kids used to have to use their imagination big time, and run around using, I don't know, Action Men and Cindy dolls, and, you know, in my active imagination, reenact movies. Anyway, what I used to do when I was doing that is that I had my first ever little record deck, and I chose to borrow some of my dad's LPs to begin with and play them along as the soundtrack, accompanying the soundtrack to the scene we were doing. All done, you know, live. None of this was recorded, so it was all just just for fun, really. But the first album I remember is an album by Laurie Johnson, who is a famous television composer in the UK. He composed the music for The Avengers, some great music in there, the TV series The Avengers that ran for many years, amongst many other things. But he also did the music for an album called Conquistadors. Now, this album, I think, I'm just looking here, was released in 1971. So this is before I was born. And my dad must have had the album, and I just picked it out. And basically, it wasn't just a soundtrack. Laurie Johnson did the music in there, but it was also a narration of the Spanish conquistadors. It was a narration, a story. But for whatever reason, I took from it that it was a story about monsters. It wasn't a story about monsters, but in my mind, it was a story about monsters. And I transformed it to that in my mind, but it was the music that Laurie Johnson put in there that I began to use for a series of films that me and my sister did. And that was my first foray into soundtracks, I suppose, or music, sort of film scoring music. It then went on when I was about 13, I suppose, and a friend of mine had the soundtrack for, I think it was Rocky 2 and maybe First Blood, I'm not sure. But I used to go in his house, and we would listen to various bits of music. Queen, that comes to mind because he was a massive Queen fan. And he used to occasionally put on the soundtrack, like Rocky 2 and First Blood, and suddenly I began to really fall in love with film music. My dad owned a record shop, so I started to order soundtracks off him and get them at dealer price, which was great, especially for I could only afford them. I had a Saturday job, I think, and I could only afford a soundtrack here and there. And I remember the early soundtracks I got, or early-ish soundtracks I got, Jaws 3D by Alan Parker. I played all the time, literally wore that LP out. And they're the ones I remember predominantly. I played Jaws 3 a lot. And I then also remember getting heavily into John Carpenter with actually before Halloween. I don't know if I saw Halloween first, but anyway, I got the soundtrack for Prince of Darkness on vinyl on LP, and that was the first John Carpenter soundtrack I owned rather, not owed. And that was where my lower film music really began. During that period, I was about 15 at that time, and from then on, it just grew. A company called Silver Screen Records in the UK, still going today, released I remember released the soundtrack to Omen 2, Damien, Omen 2 by Jerry Goldsmith. I fell in love with that, and I quickly became a Jerry Goldsmith fan. Of course, there was the John Williams music as well, from films like E.T., Star Wars, Superman, the very big films. And then years later, as the years went by, my love of film music was always there. I'd always be listening to film music. I'd always be wanting to collect film music and buy the albums. But eventually I began to really get into it and try to look at scores for a lot older films. So I started to get into movies of the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and of course the 60s. And basically there's composers obviously like Eric Wolfgang Korngold, Alfred Newman, Bernard Herrmann, of course, to name but a few. But it was really those early days of when I first discovered I was always interested in the music. From the days of watching television programs like Knight Rider, the A-Team, so Stu Phillips and Mike Post did some fantastic stuff, and even TV music was I was a big fan of. I was a Doctor Who fan when I was younger, and I remember getting the LP of the music from Doctor Who, just a selection of music from them. I think from the 80s stories around at that time, and playing that to death. But that's where it really springs from, and it keeps going obviously to this day. Hence why I'm doing this channel now. But I'll be interested. I don't want this video to go on for too long, because I will be doing more videos about other composers, the composers that inspired my love of film music. So this is really just a video just to say how I got into film music. But I'd love to hear how you got into film music, or how if you're wondering how to get into film music, there isn't really an art to it. You just it's there or it's not there. So you go and see a film, you like the music does something, and you then, after watching the film, you want to search out and think, well, yeah, that music was great, and I want to delve more into that, want to hear it, and that can obviously, and these days it can be a lot from television productions as well. You get some great music out there as well. But anyway, let me know, post down below, let me know how you got into film music, what was the sort of inspiration for you, and I'll be back with some more videos very, very soon. Until next time, thanks for listening, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.